There's a difference between speaking to be heard and speaking to be healed. Too often we open our mouths thinking we're finding relief when all we're really doing is handing our sacred pain to people who see it as entertainment. Not every listening ear is a loving one. Not every warm hug means well, and not every smile is sincere. People will pretend to care, nod their heads, pat your back, then walk away and repeat your pain like it's gossip over tea. That's the danger of telling your problems to people who never earned the right to witness your wounds. This isn't about silence out of fear. This is about silence out of wisdom. By the end of this speech, you'll see how protecting your peace isn't selfish. It's sacred. And you'll understand why your pain deserves privacy. Your struggle deserves sanctuary, and your story deserves discernment. Stay with me. This may not be the loudest speech you'll hear today, but it might be the one your soul needed most. People don't always listen to understand. Many simply listen to retell. That's the raw truth most people learn the hard way. You think you're confiding. You think you're building connection. You think you're finally exhaling the pain you've been carrying silently. But what you don't always see is how your vulnerability becomes someone else's conversation piece. Your heartbreak becomes a punchline. Your struggle becomes part of a story that doesn't even belong to you anymore. There is a deep and dangerous illusion that everyone who listens cares, that because someone is quiet when you speak, they must be absorbing your truth with compassion. But silence is not always sympathy. Sometimes silence is a strategy. Sometimes it's how they memorize the details so they can repeat it later with flair. And the truth is, many people have no idea how to carry the weight of another person's story with dignity. You see, it's not always malice that turns your pain into gossip. Sometimes it's immaturity. Sometimes it's an ego that finds power in knowing what others don't. Sometimes it's just the lack of emotional depth to grasp how sacred your story really is. That moment when you opened your mouth and told someone the truth about what broke you, that wasn't casual. That was sacred. But to them, it was just interesting, just information. And that's the danger. We live in a time where people mistake closeness for entitlement. Just because they know you, they think they deserve access to the hidden rooms of your heart. They think your pain is their entertainment, your trials, their trivia, but not everyone is worthy of your truth. Not everyone deserves a seat in your sacred space. You need to know the difference between someone who listens with empathy and someone who listens with appetite. The first one holds your pain like it's fragile. They don't rush to respond. They don't weaponize your words. They don't turn your sorrow into a story they pass around like candy. They sit with you, they see you, they guard your words with silence. The second one, oh, they smile when you cry. Not outwardly, no. They wear compassion on their face, but their heart is already taking notes. They're crafting the perfect retelling. They're planning who they'll tell next and how it'll make them look like they're in the know. You thought you were safe because they nodded. You thought they cared because they leaned in. But when you're done speaking, you feel emptier, not lighter. That's the clue. The right listener will make you feel held. The wrong one will make you feel exposed. Sometimes the person you're crying to is the same person who'll use your tears to elevate themselves in another room. They'll share your pain to gain attention. They'll add details to make your story more dramatic. And when they're done, you'll be left wondering why you ever opened up in the first place. We don't talk enough about the emotional residue left behind after confiding in the wrong person. That heavy, sick feeling in your chest. That second guessing that creeps in, that quiet embarrassment that maybe, just maybe, you gave away something sacred to someone who only wanted to borrow it. That is the emotional consequence of being heard by the wrong ears. You owe yourself better. You owe yourself boundaries. It doesn't make you cold to protect your story. It makes you wise. You're not obligated to unwrap your wounds for people just because they're curious. Curiosity is not compassion. Interest is not intimacy. And proximity does not equal permission. Some people will never deserve the privilege of knowing what you've been through. They may ask, they may pry, they may even guilt you for not sharing, but you do not owe them an explanation. You do not owe them your grief. You do not owe them the weight of your truth. Let them wonder. Let them speculate. Let them create their own narrative. Your healing is not their business. Your pain is not their property. One of the most powerful things you'll ever learn is how to hold your own story with reverence, how to choose silence over spilling, how to take a breath instead of handing your heart to someone who sees it as a spectacle. You can be open without being exposed. You can be honest without being hollowed out. You must learn to trust the energy behind the ears that listen to you. Are they holding space, or are they holding a recorder in their mind? Are they present, or are they already mentally preparing the story they'll share later? Pay attention to how you feel after you speak. Your body will tell you the truth your heart is afraid to face. At some point, you must realize that some people don't want to understand you. They want to label you. They want to summarize you in a few dramatic sentences. They want to reduce your entire journey to a headline, but you are not a headline. You are not a soundbite. You are a soul, layered, complex, divine. So next time you feel the urge to share your deepest truth, pause. Ask yourself, is this person safe? Have they shown me through time and consistency that they can handle the weight of my truth with gentleness? If the answer is no, say less. In fact, say nothing at all. There is more power in your silence than there ever was in begging someone to understand what they were never meant to carry. Vulnerability is beautiful. It is human. It is raw. And it is real. But when vulnerability is offered in a space that is not safe, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a betrayal of self. We were not made to pour our hearts out in front of people who haven't earned the right to hold them. Yet far too often, we confuse openness with strength, thinking that the louder we speak about our pain, the freer we'll become. But freedom does not come from exposure. It comes from being understood, from being protected, from being held with care. To be vulnerable without safety is to walk barefoot on broken glass. Every word you speak becomes a shard that cuts deeper. Every truth you release into the wrong atmosphere becomes ammunition, twisted and tossed back at you. What you meant as healing becomes humiliation. What you shared in trust becomes a tale told in rooms you were never invited to. And suddenly, the openness that was supposed to make you feel lighter only leaves you bleeding. We grow up being told that vulnerability is a superpower, but even superpowers need to be wielded wisely. Vulnerability is not a performance. It is not for spectacle or applause. It is sacred. And when you hand it to someone who does not know how to handle it, you are not being strong. You are being unprotected. You are standing in a storm without shelter and hoping the lightning will skip over you. Safety is not about silence. It's about discernment. It's about knowing who has shown, not just said, that they will honor your truth. Anyone can say, "You can talk to me." But the real test is how they respond when you do. Do they hold space or do they hold judgment? Do they sit with your truth or try to fix it, shame it, or reshape it into something more comfortable for them to hear? Real safety feels like stillness. It feels like being seen without being stared at, like being heard without being handled. There is a danger in making vulnerability transactional, in thinking that if we just share enough of ourselves, someone will finally stay. That if we open up wide enough, we'll be loved deeper. But love built on exposure is fragile. It depends on your continued unraveling. You feel like you must keep bleeding to be worthy of their attention. That's not connection. That's emotional debt. And every time you pay it, you lose another piece of yourself. You should never have to set yourself on fire just to keep someone emotionally warm. And yet, so many do. They bare their wounds to people who haven't earned the right to witness their healing. They cry in front of faces that will later mimic those tears as entertainment. They share sacred stories in spaces filled with people who only want to feel closer to chaos, not closer to them. And in doing so, they betray their own soul. Self-betrayal doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It sounds like, maybe I shouldn't have told them that. It feels like the quiet ache after you've shared too much and received too little. It's the heavy silence that falls after your truth is met with coldness, or worse, curiosity. It's the sting of realizing your openness has been met not with compassion, but with consumption. You are allowed to keep parts of yourself to yourself. You are allowed to be private, even as you heal. Healing does not require an audience. Growth does not demand exposure. You do not have to explain every scar, every heartbreak, every trauma. Your story is not a community project. It is yours, and you get to choose who gets a front row seat to it. True strength is not in telling everyone everything. True strength is in knowing when to speak, who to speak to, and when silence is the most powerful protection you have. Vulnerability becomes strength when it is paired with wisdom. When you speak from a place of safety, your truth blooms. It is nurtured, not picked apart. But when you pour your soul into the wrong hands, it withers. It gets misnamed, mishandled, and misused. You have a responsibility to protect your softness, to guard your light, to ensure that the places you bleed are places that can also bandage. Otherwise, you're not healing, you're hurting deeper and calling it connection. Remember, boundaries are not barriers, they're bridges to safety. You are not too much for wanting to be safe before being vulnerable. You are not cold or closed off for keeping your heart behind lock and key until someone proves they can carry it gently. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's honoring the depth of who you are. That's refusing to betray yourself ever again. Their sympathy won't save you. It might feel good for a moment to be seen, to be heard, to be comforted by soft words and kind eyes. But comfort isn't the same as cure, and sympathy, as warm as it may appear, can only go so far. It won't lift you from the pit. It won't rebuild the broken pieces of your spirit. It won't do the work that healing demands. At best, it's a balm. At worst, it becomes a chain that keeps you dependent on outside validation for inner survival. There's a dangerous belief we carry, one born from childhood, reinforced by the world, that if we can just make someone understand our pain, they'll rescue us. That if they can see how deep the wound is, they'll carry us out of the fire. But the truth is, no one is coming to save you. Not because people don't care, but because your healing is not their responsibility. It never was. And the more you depend on sympathy to feel whole, the more disconnected you become from your own power. Sympathy is a mirror that reflects your pain, but it cannot mend it. People can hold your hand as you cry. They can say all the right words and genuinely wish for your healing. But when the conversation ends, they go home. They return to their lives, and you are left alone with the echoes of what you shared. Sympathy might soften the blow, but it cannot carry the weight of your transformation. Only you can do that. Only you can sit in the silence and face the truth. Only you can choose to stop bleeding and start rebuilding. And you must be careful, too, of those who give sympathy as a way to feel superior. The ones who listen with pity in their eyes, not empathy. The ones who comfort you just enough to feel good about themselves, but never challenge you to grow. Those who say, "I'm so sorry that happened to you," but never ask, "How will you rise from it?" Because sympathy, when it lacks depth, becomes a form of subtle control. It keeps you small, it reinforces your identity as the victim, and the more you're seen as someone to be pitied, the less you are seen as someone powerful. It's a subtle prison, and many don't even see it. You become addicted to being the one with the story, the one who went through so much, the one who gets the hugs, the attention, the kind words. But underneath it all, there's no forward movement. There's just performance. A cycle of reliving the pain because the pain gets you something, and that something feels safer than the unknown path of healing. But healing doesn't care how many people feel sorry for you. Healing demands action. It demands honesty. It asks you to look at your life with clear eyes and say, "I don't want to stay here anymore." It requires you to stop waiting for someone to validate your suffering and start honoring your survival. Sympathy is about what happened. Healing is about what happens next. And sometimes, the most dangerous part of sympathy is how it feeds the illusion that you're not strong enough to do this alone, that you need someone to constantly remind you that what you went through was hard, that you deserve kindness, that you didn't deserve the pain. And while all of that may be true, repeating it like a script does not change your reality. What changes your life is when you begin to believe it yourself, even when no one else is watching. You don't need more people to tell you they're sorry. You need people who remind you that you're capable. You need to remind yourself that even if nobody else claps for your growth, you still grew. Even if no one else sees your quiet victories, they still count. The applause of others is sweet, but your life will not change until you learn to applaud yourself, to cheer yourself forward, and to choose healing even when no one's looking. So let them offer their sympathy. Let them say kind things. Let them be moved by your story. But don't mistake their emotions for your liberation. Don't stay small just because people love you more when you're broken. Rise anyway. Even if they don't understand, even if they stop clapping when you stop crying, because you weren't made to live at the level of your pain. You were made to climb, to rise, to reclaim every piece of yourself that sorrow tried to steal. Their sympathy won't save you, but your strength, your commitment to your own healing, that will. That's what carries you from survival to wholeness. That's what sets you free. Some people secretly celebrate your suffering. They won't clap out loud when you fall, but their silence will grow louder than any applause when you rise. They won't say it to your face, but in their hearts, your struggle makes them feel superior. They carry smiles wrapped in concern, compliments dipped in subtle jabs, and every time life hits you hard, they feel a quiet sense of satisfaction. Because deep down, your pain makes them feel a little more powerful. You must understand that not everyone around you is rooting for your healing. Some are only close to monitor your misery. They wear the mask of empathy, but behind that mask is a soul that feeds on your setbacks. They ask how you're doing, not because they care, but because they're hoping the answer is still not well. Misery loves company, and your sadness gives them comfort in their own dissatisfaction. Your wounds validate their stagnancy. Your tears give them something to talk about, to analyze, to compare against their own failures. It's hard to accept, but necessary to know. Not all pain is received with compassion. Some pain is received with curiosity, and that curiosity doesn't come from care. It comes from comparison, competition, even envy. The idea that you're down while they are standing makes them feel just a little taller. They pretend to be your support system while secretly savoring your chaos. And the more vulnerable you are with them, the more power they think they have over you. They'll never say they're glad you're struggling. They'll just sit quietly in your storm, taking mental notes, watching from a distance, occasionally offering words of concern just to stay close enough to the drama. But when you need real support, action, truth, help, they vanish. They were never there to help you rebuild. They were there to watch the destruction. And what's worse, sometimes you love them. Sometimes they are family. Sometimes they are friends you've had for years. That's what makes it so difficult to see. You assume love means safety. You assume history equals loyalty. But history is not proof of integrity, and loyalty without sincerity is just proximity in disguise. Just because someone stands beside you doesn't mean they stand for you. You will know them by their reactions. Pay attention. When good things happen to you, are they quick to celebrate, or do they fall strangely silent? When life breaks you open, are they deeply present or unusually entertained? Do they hold your truth with care, or do they echo your pain in rooms you've never entered? These are not just clues. These are confirmations. Some people are only comfortable with you when you're in pieces. Your brokenness does not intimidate them. It reassures them. It makes them feel secure in their own inaction. They don't want to see you heal, not because they hate you, but because your healing would confront their excuses. Your growth would expose their unwillingness to change. Your power would remind them of everything they're refusing to become. So they root for the version of you that stays small, that stays needy, that stays dependent on their advice, their presence, their validation. Because once you rise, once you become whole, you won't need them in the same way. And some people are only in your life because they need to feel needed. The moment you start walking in your full strength, their position in your world feels threatened. That's when the sabotage starts. Not loud, not obvious, but subtle. Passive, aggressive comments, jokes that sting more than they amuse, quiet competition masked as concern. They'll say things like, "Don't forget where you came from," or "You're changing," as if growth is a betrayal. But it's not. It's only a betrayal of the version of you that made them feel comfortable. You don't owe anyone your suffering just to make them feel okay. You don't need to stay broken so others can feel whole. Your healing, your elevation, your transformation, it is not a threat. But to those who are not evolving, it will feel like one. And that's not your burden to carry. You must learn to protect your peace, not just from loud enemies, but from quiet pretenders. From those who smile when you're hurting and shrink when you're shining. From those who ask about your pain with enthusiasm and greet your progress with indifference. It is not paranoia to notice. It is not bitterness to protect yourself. It is wisdom. It is discernment. Some people will celebrate your downfall louder in private than they ever celebrated your rise in public. And once you learn to see that, you stop seeking comfort from every kind word, and you start seeking truth in every pattern. Your circle may shrink, but your peace will expand. And peace is worth more than applause from people who only clap when you're crying. Silence is a spiritual shield. It is not emptiness. It is not retreat. It is not weakness. It is protection in its purest form. In a world that demands noise, that pushes for overexposure, that pressures you to explain every move and narrate every emotion, silence becomes a sacred rebellion. It is the place where your soul rests, where your clarity sharpens, and where your spirit can no longer be accessed by those who only come to take. Silence doesn't mean you're hiding. It means you're healing. It means you've stopped auditioning for understanding from people committed to misunderstanding you. It means you're no longer handing your sacred thoughts to careless hands, no longer laying your heart bare in places that don't know how to hold it. Silence is the moment you realize that not everyone deserves access to your process. Not everyone has the capacity to honor your becoming. There is power in stillness. There is wisdom in restraint. because not every emotion deserves an announcement. Not every thought needs a platform. There are moments when silence speaks louder than any speech you could give, when holding your tongue becomes the most eloquent form of self-respect, when peace becomes more urgent than proving your point. People often misunderstand the quiet ones. They think silence is void of thought, but they don't know the kind of storms that silence survives. They don't see the inner dialogues, the wrestling, the release. They don't see the fire being refined behind that calm exterior. And they certainly don't realize how dangerous a person becomes when they stop defending themselves, when they let their peace speak in places where words once failed. You don't have to explain your decisions. You don't have to unpack your pain for people who only want to spectate it. You don't have to argue for your growth to be seen. Let them wonder. Let them guess. Let your silence create the distance between their assumptions and your truth. Because your healing doesn't need an audience. It needs protection, it needs patience, and it needs privacy. Silence is also where discernment is born. When you stop filling every space with sound, you begin to hear what's real. You hear your own intuition, that quiet voice that gets drowned out by noise. You start noticing patterns in people you never caught before. You feel the shift in energy when someone's words don't match their spirit. You become sharper, more selective, more intentional, because silence teaches you to listen, not just to others, but to yourself. In silence, you learn to become your own safe space. You stop needing to vent everything, post everything, prove everything. You find peace in holding things sacred. You begin to understand that just because something happened doesn't mean it needs to be told. Some things are for your heart and heaven only. Some victories are meant to be enjoyed quietly. Some battles are best fought in stillness. There is also protection in silence. Not everyone can handle your truth, and not everyone deserves it. When you speak before it's time, you risk inviting energies that weren't meant to witness your process. Some people only show up to sabotage. Some only listen to collect. But when you withhold, when you wait, when you keep certain things between you and your spirit, you shield your growth from premature exposure. Silence keeps you from engaging in battles that cost more than they're worth. Not everything requires a reaction. Not every insult deserves a response. You don't have to clap back to reclaim your power. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing, walk away, and let the dust settle without your involvement. That is power. That is control. That is spiritual maturity. There will come a time when your silence will be mistaken for defeat. Let it be. Let them misread your calm as surrender. Let them mistake your quiet for weakness. Because while they talk, you're evolving. While they gossip, you're growing. While they speculate, you're sharpening your vision. You are not here to explain your every move. You are here to become. And sometimes becoming requires stepping into the shadows, not to shrink, but to prepare. Silence is where strength regenerates. It's where your inner world realigns before you return to the outer one. It's where your soul gets a moment to breathe without judgment, without performance, without intrusion. You don't need to be loud to be strong. You don't need to be seen to be sovereign. You don't need to be heard to be whole. So don't be afraid to grow in silence. Don't be afraid to heal in private. Don't be afraid to let your quiet speak for you. Because when you wear silence like armor, nothing thrown at you can pierce your peace. When you master stillness, you master your space. And when you protect your energy with silence, you remind the world that your spirit is not public property. It is sacred, it is guarded, and it is yours. Speak after you've healed, not while you're bleeding. Because when you speak from the wound, the pain does the talking. The fear, the confusion, the rage, they all take the microphone. And while it might feel like release, What you're often doing is bleeding onto people who didn't cut you. You're giving the rawest parts of yourself to a world that is not always ready or worthy to hold you with care. It's tempting to voice everything in the heat of the hurt, to reach for understanding, to vent, to scream, to post, to cry out loud so the world knows you're hurting. But what feels like empowerment in that moment can quickly become exposure. And when the adrenaline wears off, you're left feeling empty. Regret creeps in. Your story feels tainted. You begin to wonder, did I speak from my truth or from my trauma? There's nothing wrong with expressing pain. It is human to cry, to want to be understood, to want others to know what you've been through. But there is a difference between processing and performing. When you speak while you're still bleeding, your story has no edges, no clarity. You can't tell where the story ends and the suffering begins. And in your desperation to be heard, you can give away too much of yourself, pieces that you needed to heal in silence. Your healing deserves privacy, not secrecy, but sacredness. It deserves space where the world cannot poke at your progress, where people cannot weaponize your honesty, where you are not trying to explain your way into peace. You are not obligated to narrate your recovery to an audience that claps more when you're broken than when you're whole. Your healing is not a performance, it is a process, and it doesn't owe anyone a timestamp or a spotlight. Speaking before you're ready often invites opinions that you're too fragile to carry. When you speak while you're bleeding, what you share can be twisted, misunderstood, judged. And those judgments don't just live in the mouths of others. They echo in your mind. They become inner dialogue. They become shame. They make you question your truth because you shared it too soon. But when you speak from your scars, not your wounds, your voice has strength. Your words are rooted. You're not searching for validation. You're offering perspective. You've done the work. You've sat with the pain. You've sifted through the chaos. And now when you speak, it comes from a place of power, not from desperation. Your story becomes a testimony, not a trauma dump. That's what growth sounds like. It's quiet at first. It happens in the stillness. And then one day when you open your mouth, you don't cry. You teach. You don't lash out. You reflect. You don't relive the pain. You redeem it. That's the voice of someone who didn't just survive, but healed. You may think your story won't matter unless you share it while it's fresh. But what makes your story powerful is not how raw it is, it's how resolved it is. People don't need to hear your agony as it breaks you. They need to hear how you rebuilt, how you found your footing, how you turned the pain into purpose, not while it was happening, but when it no longer controls you. And even then, you don't owe your story to everyone. Some stories are only meant to be whispered in safe places. Some are only for the pages of your journal or for someone who's walked the same road and truly understands. Not everything needs to be posted. Not everything needs to be public. Your healing is yours. And when you choose to share it, let it be from a place of freedom, not from pressure. There is beauty in waiting, in letting the wound scab over, in letting it itch, sting, stretch, and finally close. And once it does, you'll realize you see things differently. You're no longer blinded by the pain. You can see the lesson. You can see the patterns. You can forgive without needing an apology. You can speak without trembling. So speak, but speak after the bleeding has stopped. Speak when you no longer need their sympathy to breathe. Speak when your story has turned into a stepping stone, not a stumbling block. Speak when you are no longer in the moment but beyond it, looking back, not falling through. Because when you speak from your healing, your words don't just express pain, they carry power. They don't just echo suffering, they create space for others to heal too. And that's when your voice becomes more than just a cry. It becomes a call for wholeness, for strength, for truth, a call that rises not from the wound, but from the warrior who walked through it and lived to tell the story. You don't owe anyone a backstage pass to your breaking. Some things are yours and yours alone. Keep them sacred. Let your healing be quiet, your growth be private, and your peace be loud. Because when you learn to protect your pain from careless hands, you finally honor what you've been through. And that kind of strength, that kind of silence, it's the most powerful story never told.